Dette den internasjonale kristne ambassades hovedkontor i Jerusalem. Dagens program hentet fra dette stedet, eller rettere sagt hos to av de mest sentrale personene som holder hus her. Det gjelder administrerende direktør Jürgen Bühler og mediedirektør David Parsons. De 2 av 45 ansatte fra 20 nasjoner i dette bygget her i bydelen Katamon, sør i det sentrale Jerusalem. Dette det gamle ambassadeområdet i byen, men nå det bare ICEJ som holder til her, og har gjort det siden 1997. I vår samtale med Jürgen Bühler starter han med å fortelle om den spesielle bakgrunnen for denne gamle, ærverdige bygningen.
It's interesting, the story of that building is that it is an old embassy. There used to be 4 African nations which had their embassy here in the house. You can still see outside the flag posts of those 4 embassies which were there. And it's still owned today by the Republic of Ivory Coast. They are our landlords today. And the story is that when the house was for rent, they were quite interested to find a good prominent partner here in Israel. And it was Shimon Peres who wanted to have the peace center here in that building. And then the Prime Minister's wife, the First Lady of the Republic of Ivory Coast, she heard the Christian embassy also wanted to move here to this building. And she told her husband, she said, I rather would like to have the Christian embassy coming here than Shimon Peres with his peace center. So this was a quite fascinating story for us. And since then, since 1997, the Christian embassy is here, and we are very proud to be hosted by the Ivory Coast, and it's a wonderful representative building here. Well, it is quite fascinating. Over the last couple of years, we have seen that the Lord blessed our ministry in a wonderful way. We have seen quite a lot of growth in the financial area, but also growth in the areas of our outreach. We started a few years ago to engage the world with a new television program, which is broadcasted every week here from Jerusalem. And we started a couple of new initiatives here from the Christian Embassy. That means we have more staff people than we had in a long time. And we see the building is getting much smaller than it used to be for us. And we are actually looking very actively right now to find maybe another facility for us or to expand that current building right now. In 2015, I would say the most important call and the most important task of the Christian Embassy is to undergird the change which is taking place today here in the land in regard to the perception of Jewish-Christian relations. If you would have been here in this office 30 years ago or 35 years ago when the Christian Embassy was established, very few people wanted to deal with Christians. It was just 35 years after the Holocaust. It was 35 years after 6 million Jews have been killed by Nazi Germany, where all the Jewish people in Europe were thinking, and here in Israel, of course, that the Christians and the Christian church around the world is a community which hates us. And when the founders of the embassy came here, it was very difficult to get established. Today it's completely different. We have extremely good connections to the Israeli Knesset. We are working on a regular basis with Knesset members. We take them around the world to Christian conferences to address issues in relationship to Israel. We are working with Yad Vashem. We have an official partnership with Yad Vashem where we are working with the institution here in the land which commemorates the most tragic part of Christian history with the Jewish people, the Holocaust. We are working with different Israeli institutions like the Keren Hayesod or the Jewish Agency, helping right now with the Aliyah from the Ukraine and from other parts of the world like France, and to see all that happening, where even today 2 of the leading business people of Israel were here in our offices, to see all that happening, it's a great miracle. And what we see today is that there is a season of growth and expansion where we see God is opening a lot of new doors for our ministry, where we can reach out to the Israeli people on almost every level of the society. And to undergird this development, that's what I would see right now as the most important thing. It affects us to the degree that we see that new projects are being born. For example, we are this year very active to help the Jewish community from France to come here to Israel. We would have never thought about that maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But today we see the numbers of Jewish people from France who register and want to come to Israel is 3 or 4 times higher than at any time before. So it has a direct impact in our work that we are called for activity and we are called for action to help the Jewish communities from Europe to make Aliyah here to the land. But also it places a challenge before us. Europe is a Christian continent. It's a continent which reads the Bible. That means they should, in principle, understand that we as European Christians, we need to stand at the side of Israel. And to see today a new wave of anti-Semitism coming to Europe means that we are challenged more than ever to challenge this anti-Semitism and bring a message of hope and of support for Israel to the European continent. This is certainly a very important task from us, but not only that, as I said, the key role will also be to challenge the churches in Europe to take a very clear stand in regard to Israel. I think we cannot afford it again to be silent in Europe when we see another wave of anti-Semitism rising up. It's the time for the church in Europe to stand up and to have a very clear voice which is being heard by the community and by the governments. I believe this year it will be a very big feast. We see already now the number of people registering for the Feast of Tabernacles is larger and bigger than at any time before. I believe God gave us a brand new and exciting facility here in Jerusalem, the Jerusalem Arena, which is a brand new basketball arena. And we will be there this year for the second time. Last year was the first time. And this is a place which can potentially hold more than 12,000 people from around the world. And this is really the vision of my heart, that we see this place 1 year filled with 12,000 people from around the world worshiping the King of Kings here in Jerusalem. Now, the theme this year of the Feast of Tabernacles is Reformation. And I believe this has a very important message for the church, because in some way the church has lost the real impact of the Reformation to a large degree. If you look at the Reformation which came from Martin Luther or from John Calvin, they had a significant impact on the society in the countries where they were living at. You know, much of our Western culture today was established because of the reformers. Defined about our work ethics. They defined what our understanding of time and punctuality. They even defined the way what we looked at as art or listened to the music. You know, all the great composers of the past, Johann Sebastian Bach or Georg Friedrich Händel, they were writing the songs to give glory to God. Many of the ancient paintings give testimony that the painters wanted to give glory to God in their paintings. Today we are living in a highly secularized world, and I believe the church in a way needs to gain back this ground which they have lost, that we have an impact in our society. Secondly, I do believe that the Reformation of Martin Luther and of John Calvin didn't go far enough. They restored many important doctrines to the church. They brought us back the understanding of being justified by faith alone and not by our works. They brought back the importance of the work of God, but they didn't touch the issue of Israel. That means there's still something in the Reformation which needs to be completed. There's a very interesting development. If you look at the last 3-4 centuries of church history, there was a move which continued from the Reformation, which had to do with the missionary movement. You know, Martin Luther and John Calvin, they didn't believe that Christians should go around the world and spread the gospel. But it was mainly the Puritans and the Moravian brothers in Europe which had the call and which understood the mission which Jesus gave to the disciple to bring the gospel to the ends of this world. Now, what was happening within 2 centuries, The church changed dramatically. You can't actually see a church today anymore in Europe which doesn't send out missionaries in the world. Every church has a mission department. And I do believe we are living today in a season where God is bringing, in a very similar manner, the issue of Israel back to the church, where I personally believe in 50 years from now, there will not be a church anymore which will not deal with Israel. Churches will understand God is changing the way how He is dealing with Israel, and we cannot afford anymore to ignore the subject of Israel. And I believe this year's Feast of Tabernacles will touch upon that. It will be a prophetic call to the church to understand that we cannot ignore Israel anymore. We need to take a stand. We need to become a blessing church towards Israel, and we need to recognize the roots where we as churches are coming from, which means our roots are laying here in the land with the Jewish people. It's a very complicated situation what we have today. As you rightly say, that Israel in a way is like a lighthouse of democracy and freedom and liberty here in the Middle East, while Israel is surrounded by nations which are in complete chaos. In Syria in the north there is fighting. In Egypt there are still riots on the streets. In Jordan there's a very unstable situation, and people are afraid that Lebanon also will very soon fall into the hands of ISIS. So Israel has been very stable in all that. In a way there is a good news in all this chaos what we see today, because over the last 3-4 years, some people say even the last 5 to 10 years, there has been for the first time in recent history a dramatic growth of Arab Muslim people who find their faith in Jesus Christ. And this is unprecedented in history, that for the first time large numbers of Muslims realize that their own religion is not offering them the peace and the fulfillment what they were expecting, and they realize they can find it only with Jesus Christ. Pastors are being stopped in Iraq today from people on the street, and they say, I see in your face you are a Christian. Tell me, where can I find this Jesus? And we see that the Spirit of God is moving dramatically, even in places like Saudi Arabia, where churches are being formed today to such a size. It was unbelievable for us a couple of decades ago. A brother from India, a missionary who is preaching regularly in Saudi Arabia, he told me just a few days ago here in Jerusalem, he says, we had revival meetings in Saudi Arabia with hundreds of people attending, and the police was even giving security for those meetings that they can take place. So in all the midst of the chaos what we see today, we also see God moving today in a powerful way, that Muslims are getting saved, and in a way that this shaking what we see in a way is drawing people closer to God. For Israel, of course, it means that they are challenged with a complete new situation. You can say in a way the political cards are completely reshuffled. What was true 5 years ago is not true anymore today. And right now Israel is challenged with ISIS in the north, which is also declaring very clearly that when they are successful in Syria, the next aim will be Israel. They are challenged from Hezbollah and Hamas, which are supported by Iran. We right now had the discussions with Iran regarding the nuclear bombs, and like it looks today, the world community is not strong enough to stop Iran producing nuclear weapons. So there is a significant challenge for Israel today. On the other side, we also see something which nobody of us would have thought it would be possible 5 years ago. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, countries like Kuwait, they recognize that they themselves today are threatened by radical Islam, and they are forming a very unusual alliance with Israel. They say, Israel, you need to help us to fight radical Islam. And we couldn't have imagined that 5 years ago, that Saudi Arabia would one day ask Israel to help them in the fight against radical Islam. So there is a complete reversal and change today in the Middle East taking place, where I believe nobody can say yet what will be the final end and the final outcome of all that.
Jürgen Bühler er en svært aktiv mann, og fra 25. til 28. juni kan du møte han i Philadelphias lokaler i Kristiansand når ICEJ holder sin årlige sommerkonferanse. Tilbake i Jerusalem møter vi David Parsons. David Parsons er ikke en vanlig informasjonsmedarbeider med rolige dager. Å stå i spissen for Israels sak er krevende og utfordrende. Parsons spiller en svært viktig rolle i arbeidet til den internasjonale kristne ambassade. Han kom hit i 1995 som koordinator for den 3. internasjonale kristne sionistkongressen. I 1997 ble han talsmann for ICEJ. I dag er han mediedirektør, og hans evne til å forsvare og dokumentere jødene og Israels posisjon i nyhetsbildet er av vesentlig betydning.
Look, to work in the media defending Israel, it's a constant battle. The enemies of Israel never seem to go away, and there always seems to be new haters that are being raised up to throw their poison at Israel. And so we have to always be patient and diligent in standing with Israel. But you see, sometimes it just comes in waves. You saw it in the Second Lebanon War in 2006, and then the first Gaza rocket war, 2009, again in 2011, and now again this past summer. And all of these were wars that were thrust upon Israel. Israel just didn't go out and start it. These were things that the enemy attacked Israel, and yet Israel was put on the defensive, on its heels, so to speak, having to defend itself. And the hatred against Israel just never seems to dry up. It's always being passed on, the same poison from one person to the next. And so it's a constant battle, a constant job to defend Israel in the media. Well, when we try to defend Israel in the media, I think we can do so from a position of strength because truth is on our side. Israel has a good, positive story to tell, and so we don't have to make things up, we don't have to lie. You can't get frustrated with the way the enemy is lying and throwing all sorts of deceptions and dishonesty against Israel. You just have to tell the truth, and hopefully the truth, catches up with the lie eventually, and people who are objective, who are reasonable-minded people, when they really weigh everything, they'll see Israel was in the right. And you see it, for example, in the Mavi Mara incident, where this ship was sent to supposedly take humanitarian relief to Gaza, but it was really just a propaganda provocation even by the Turkish government against Israel. They didn't have much of humanitarian aid on there. It was just a bunch of Israel haters. And the lie was that Israel had attacked defenseless people on this ship, and it took a few hours before the video got out of these were IDF soldiers going into a very hard situation, dropping in from a helicopter, who they were attacked with clubs and all sorts of instruments. And when the truth comes out, you can be proud Israel was in the right in this. Look, to try and predict the Middle East, the region, you just learn it's hard to figure out what's going to happen next week or even tomorrow, much less 1 year from now. But we have seen these rocket wars that just pop up by some incident on the border early morning, and by noon it's all out rocket wars, rockets flying everywhere. So whether we have another one of those soon or not, it's hard to tell. But there are the ingredients, the coalescing of several things that really give us concern for the near future. The Iranian nuclear program and how much that issue comes to a head, even in regards to tensions in the region, the Sunni Shiite civil war that's going on now, the battles between the Sunnis and the Shiites in Syria and Iraq, the attempts to spill over and into Israel and to attack Israel on all its borders. The border with Syria was quiet for decades, and now it's a hot border. There are Al-Qaeda affiliated and Islamic State affiliated groups in Sinai trying to light that border up. So Israel just has to be vigilant as ever, and this convergence of certain things. The next war, I fear, I don't know how soon it will come, but it will involve Hamas and other radical Islamist groups from Gaza and Sinai in the south, plus Hezbollah and other radical Islamist groups attacking from Lebanon and Syria in the north, what also involves the Jordanian border and that whole long border with Jordan down through the Jordan Valley and the Arabah Rift. And even from the sea, we had frogmen this last war coming in from the sea, and even attacks on Israel's oil platforms, these new natural gas platforms offshore. It's going to be a conflict that heats up on all fronts and involves the whole nation of Israel, probably in bomb shelters.
Et av de mørkeste kapitlene i vår kirkehistorie behandlingen av jødene. Man har forkynt forfølgelse og hat mot dette folket. I vår tid pågår det en oppvåkning i kirken. Endelig vi i ferd med å forstå at Guds ord og frelsen kommer fra jødene, og at vi står i gjeld til dem.
I 1980 vedtok Israels parlament at det forente Jerusalem skulle være landets evige, udelelige hovedstad. Under trusler fra den arabiske liga om oljeboykott flyttet nasjonene sin ambassade fra Jerusalem til Tel Aviv i protest mot Israel. Samtidig opplevde en gruppe kristne fra ulike nasjoner et kall om å etablere internasjonale kristne ambassade i Jerusalem utifra profeten Jesaja 40, vers 1. Trøst, trøst mitt folk, sier deres Gud. Tal kjærlig til Jerusalem.
Siden 1980 har ICEJ hjulpet over 120 000 jøder å vende hjem til Israel. Ukraina, Frankrike og India for tiden fokusområder for dette arbeidet. En viktig side av vår tjeneste vårt sosiale hjelpearbeid, ICEJ Aid. Gjennom mange ulike prosjekter i landet vi med å hjelpe trengende. Både jøder og arabere, kristne og muslimer. I Haifa vi med å finansiere driften av hjemmet for holocaust-overlevende, hvor mennesker som opplevde nazistenes grusomheter får muligheten til en verdig alderdom. ICEJ partner med Holocaust-museet Yad Vashem, hvor vi med å finansiere driften av Christian Friends of Yad Vashem. Hvert år arrangerer ICEJ et kristent arrangement under løvetefesten i Jerusalem. Dette en stor lovprisningsfest for kongenes konge i hans egen by. Samtidig det en sterk proklamasjon av kristen kjærlighet til jødene og deres hjemland Israel. Til dette arrangementet kommer tusener av kristne fra nærmere 100 nasjoner. Dette det årlig største kristne arrangementet i Israel. Gjennom kontorer og avdelinger i om lag 80 nasjoner vi med å undervise kirken om jødene og Israel i lys av Guds ord. Her i Norge arrangerer vi konferanser, deltar på møter, produserer TV og radioprogrammer. Vi også på internett, og du kan følge oss på Facebook. 11 ganger i året sender vi ut vår avis et ord fra Jerusalem til alle våre partnere. ICEJ din ambassade i Jerusalem. Vær med og gjør en forskjell du også. Bli støttepartner i dag, og ta del i kallet. Trøst, trøst mitt folk.
The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem is here in Jerusalem since more than 30 years. We are your embassy in Jerusalem, connecting your churches to the nation of Israel.
ICEJ har i ukene og månedene som kommer flere arrangement. Først ut er den regionale konferansen i Stavanger. Den holdes 29. og 30. mai i IMI-forum. Deretter kommer den årlige sommerkonferansen i Kristiansand, som i år holdes i lokalene til Philadelphia Kristiansand fra 25. til 28. juni. Årets høydepunkt vil være løvehyttefesten som finner sted i Israel fra 26. september til 6. oktober. For mer informasjon om disse arrangementene, gå inn på www.ICEJs.no.